Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm your host, Samantha Reigle. I've spent more than 20 years as a mediator helping people resolve conflict, but here on this podcast, I like to talk about why conflict and any kind of distress at all show up and how changing the way we respond can make life a whole lot easier. We have Valentine's Day coming up, so I wanted to talk about dating in 2026. It seems like it's a doozy out there. I've been inundated with dating sucks, or I'm done with dating and just going to focus on myself content. It's kind of wild because my algorithm has been filled with all this dating content, which I find slightly amusing considering I'm married with 2 kids. I guess I must have lingered on one dating reel a little too long because I do find it really fascinating, largely because I remember feeling all the same feelings. So I guess the internet decided I needed to revisit my past. It genuinely does bring back so many feelings, and at the time, they drove me mad. So I totally get it. Before I met my husband, I was habitually single. I definitely dated, but my dating life looked more like inappropriate love affairs, toxic situationships, fast, intense flings. I had relationships, I guess you could call them, sure, but nothing that ever lasted beyond 6 to 8 months. I dated some really interesting characters, genuinely good people, some of them, but nothing stuck for the long term. And then when things would end, I had a tendency to cling to what could have been longer than what was healthy. So when I scroll and see all these single women and men online right now talking about how exhausted and disillusioned they feel, I totally get it. I really do. And what I hear is a longing for something real, maybe authentic is the right word, an authentic dating experience where maybe both people show up with good intentions, actually wanting to get to know each other and being there for the right reasons. For a lot of people, unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily roll out that way. And this isn't just something I'm observing from the outside. I mean, for me, dating anxiety really kicked in as I approached 30 years old. That's when I started thinking seriously about becoming a mother. And once that desire came into focus, dating to me stopped feeling, I didn't want it to be casual anymore. I knew that if I wanted a family, I needed to find a partner who would be a good father and someone I could build a stable, supportive partnership with. For me, that meant marriage. Not that it is for everyone, but that's what I wanted. I'm not even sure if I would have changed how I dated if kids weren't part of the picture, but they were. So I did, or at least I wanted to change. And here's the thing, even though my intentions changed and that I wanted to date with the focus being on dating for marriage, the patterns that I had developed over, since I was 15 years old, they didn't necessarily change. I kept drawing in the same kinds of relationships, situationships that always ended up failing. So on some level, I didn't know I was the common denominator, but attraction doesn't exactly respond to logic, right? I couldn't just decide to be attracted to a different type of guy overnight. I had to really stretch myself, and it was uncomfortable. At that time, I wasn't meeting anyone just by living my life. So I did use dating apps, and eventually that is how I met my husband. I was 34 when we met. But those last few years between me deciding I did want to be a mother and I needed to date differently and then meeting him, that's 4 years. I was pretty miserable during that time. And it actually correlated with all my friends finding their person. And then I had to celebrate them. And on top of that, I had to constantly field questions about when I was going to settle down. So It was very disheartening. It was a miserable time. I felt anxious. What made it harder was that everything else in my life was going well. My career was taking off. I finally paid off all my student loans. I did have money to travel, and travel is a passion of mine. So I was able to, travel around different parts of the world. I loved where I lived. I had strong friendships and a really cool full social life. But my love life felt like this one painful, draining area that never seemed to move forward. I hated dating. So when I see what's happening now all over social media, it does feel incredibly familiar. People sound like they're completely done. They're depleted. They're burnt out. They're disillusioned. Like they've reached a point where they're not even frustrated anymore. They're just tired. And in my own experience, I can tell you that dating apps have a way of making people feel less like humans, more like commodities that you trade, something you try on, swipe past, move on from without much thought. There's a lot of breadcrumbing, love bombing, ghosting, and I think just many people don't feel like there are genuinely, intentionally, or emotionally available people left on the apps. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying this as someone who avoided them altogether. Like I said, I met my husband on a dating app back in 2016, 10 years ago. But even then, I had a strong love-hate relationship with the apps. I was on and off for a good 8 years. So this isn't me looking back with like rose-colored glasses at all. Even 10 years ago, the process was draining. And that is why what I'm seeing today feels so familiar to me. On the one hand, I think apps were helpful because they introduced me to people I never would have crossed paths with, and just living my normal life, including my husband, we would have never crossed paths. So that part worked really well. But the trade-off was time and energy. I'd find myself meeting up for a drink with someone, realizing within the first 2 minutes that they were not my person. And even if the date itself was fine, the process of doing that over and over again took a toll. I was exhausted by it. But at least back then, most of the time, you still got to the actual date. And what I'm hearing now, it feels a little different. People are describing on social media is that you don't even get to the let's grab a drink stage anymore, except with a select few. It seems like people are using the apps more like a game and swiping, chatting, talking about meeting up, but never actually following through. Or if there is a follow through, then the date gets canceled last minute. And even when things do move forward with the date and you go maybe once or twice or 3 times, everything seems to be going well. And then someone disappears and ghosts the other person. You talk about seeing each other again and then nothing. So to be clear, that kind of behavior existed 10 years ago too. I mean, I experienced it, and I'll be honest, I probably participated in it in myself at times. When it would happen to me, of course, I wanted to know like why, but I had to eventually make peace with the idea that if I met someone 3 times and it didn't continue, we were just not compatible, and I wasn't necessarily owed an explanation. So if you think of it like, okay, I'm female. If I met another female maybe 3 times as a friend and the friendship didn't go anywhere, I wouldn't expect a formal closure conversation. So why would I expect that level of accountability from someone I barely know romantically? That mindset helped me not take things so personally. And yes, it still hurt when I liked what I saw up to that point, but that's part of dating. It was what it was. I think what's happening now might feel bigger than that. What I'm sensing is that dating apps today aren't just like neutral tools people are misusing. They're designed to keep people on them, not to get people off of them. There's no real incentive built into the system to move people into real life connection. And so these endless virtual almost meetings start to replace actual relationship building. And those semi-connections don't nourish anyone. They create just enough stimulation to stay engaged, but not enough substance to feel grounded or connected over time. And that wears people down. It makes them cynical. It makes them question themselves and each other. And I think this is mirroring something deeper. The frustration people feel with dating right now isn't just about apps or bad behavior. I think it's pointing to a larger misalignment and how we're approaching relationships, attraction, and connection in this moment. So the systems we're using no longer support what people actually want. And dating is where this fracture is becoming impossible to ignore. Remember, when conflict shows up, it's because we are evolving, and what worked for us in the past is no longer going to work for us moving forward. And the fracture is what's getting our attention, that we have to change how we approach something, our belief about it. Okay? So this is what's getting our attention. It's important to name what that fracture is. I don't think people are emotionally broken, afraid to commit, or incapable of intimacy. I think the problem is much simpler than that. The rules we were taught about dating don't match the world we're actually living in anymore. Something fundamental shifted, but we're still trying to use an old framework to navigate a new reality. And that old framework was built on very clear roles for women and men. For a long time, these relationships were organized around these very clear roles for women and men. Men were taught to protect and provide. Women were taught to be attractive, chosen, supported, and cared for. Whether we consciously agree with those roles or not, they shaped how attraction developed, how people paired off, and what was expected inside the relationship. But that structure does not hold anymore. A lot of women today don't need to be taken care of in the traditional sense. They can get their own credit cards, they can buy their own property, they can provide for themselves financially. They're educated, capable, emotionally aware. What many women actually want now is emotional support, shared values, and a partner who takes care of himself and feels steady when life gets hard. Someone who can communicate effectively, regulate their emotions, and then show up consistently. What they don't want is to be the one holding everything together emotionally anymore. They don't want to carry the full weight of the relationship while the man goes off and focuses on his career. They don't want to manage his feelings, anticipate his needs, and smooth things over for him, while also taking care of their own lives. What they're looking for is someone who can tend to their own well-being and then also show up emotionally when support is needed. So the relationship is more balanced and actually feels like a partnership instead of a one-person job. And I can speak from experience here because this is what I wanted when I started dating with intention. At the same time, many men were raised with a relationship modeled by maybe their parents or grandparents, where the message was that their value comes from strength, leadership, and providing, from not being too emotional, but from being impressive, from being the quote-unquote man. And when that version of masculinity meets a world where women don't need rescuing or protection, and it looks different than it used to, it's going to create confusion. And there's another layer to this that's uncomfortable but important to say out loud. Most women don't need protection from the world anymore. They need protection from men. And all this toxic masculinity going on right now, the reality changes how women move through dating. It affects what feels safe, what feels threatening, and what qualities actually matter long term. If you're going to vote against our rights as women, that does not feel safe to us. Confidence without emotional awareness doesn't feel attractive in the same way once you've lived enough life. Charisma without integrity isn't attractive. It feels like a risk to women. So you have people entering the dating world with totally different expectations, different conditioning, different definitions of what a good partner even is. I think dating apps just amplify this fracture. Apps are very good at highlighting charisma, right? Presentation, confidence. They reward people who can perform in short bursts, just like social media. You know how to be appealing quickly if you're this type of person. The apps are great at creating attraction, but they're not built to assess emotional safety, nervous system regulation, or even shared values. People connect, they feel chemistry, and then they hit a wall a few interactions in. Not because anyone necessarily lied, but because attraction got them in the door and then reality couldn't sustain what the spark promised. And I know this pattern well because it was my pattern for a long time, many, many years. For most of my dating life, I was consistently drawn to a certain type of man, charismatic, outgoing, big presence, the kind of guy who could walk into a room and immediately be noticed. My therapist once called them peacocks. And I think that's like a great word for who I was attracted to. Beautiful men that were just vibrant and electric with their personality. Good guys, but they sucked all of the energy out of the room. I was genuinely attracted to that energy. It felt exciting, alive, magnetic. And for a while, I thought that meant that was right for me because I was so drawn to it. But it never lasted. I never quite felt emotionally safe. I'd feel unsettled. These types of personalities can keep you on your toes, but that's not what is sustainable over time. A lot of what was going on was this feeling of not quite feeling like I could hold on to them, like I couldn't fully reach them. And if I'm being honest, I wasn't even really fully reachable myself either. At the time, I didn't understand that. I thought the discomfort meant I just needed to try harder and maybe be more patient or wait for things to deepen naturally. But what I eventually came to understand, mostly through my therapy, was that me and then the type of guy that I was attracted to were both emotionally unavailable to each other. So the men I kept attracting weren't distant by accident. They were actually mirroring what I was putting out. My emotional unavailability wasn't about not wanting connection. I think it came from never really feeling safe in dating. So when you don't feel safe emotionally, you don't fully open. You stay a little bit guarded. And I do remember feeling like I can't be vulnerable. Like I remember having that feeling of not showing too much vulnerability. Like if you're upset, like don't cry, kind of thing. That guardedness shaped who I would draw in. And looking back, I can see that my attraction itself was wired to intensity and not stability. I had learned to associate excitement with connection and chemistry with compatibility. And those things aren't the same. Intensity creates movement, but stability creates space. One will keep you leaning forward and the other lets you settle. At that point in my life, I was still drawn to what kept me leaning into that. And then I met my husband. And I'll be honest with you, he was not the type I usually went for. He is not a peacock. He was calm, reserved, grounded. He would blend into a crowd rather than command it. There was no performance, no edge, no big personality filling the room. And I'm going to be honest, it took a time for me to feel attracted to that energy. At that point in my life, I was still very much drawn to the peacocks. I couldn't turn that off. That pull toward charisma, polish, and intensity, that hadn't gone away. In fact, I actually blew my husband off after our second date. What's interesting is that even though I didn't feel like a romantic attraction in the way I was used to, I genuinely did love being around him. Both dates that we had stretched longer than I expected. We were spending like 6-7 hours with each other. They were long dates. So I was trying to take all the time he was willing to give me, which was unusual for me. I was normally quick to wrap things up and move on when I didn't feel like an instant attraction with somebody, like a 2-drink minimum and I'm out the door. But with him, I wanted to soak up all of his time. There was just something about his energy that felt good to sit in. He was so calm and easy and grounded. I just wanted to soak him up. But because it didn't come with that familiar spark or urgency, I assumed it meant that there was no romantic potential. And to be clear, it wasn't that he wasn't attractive. He's very attractive. But everything about him threw me off in ways I didn't have language for. He was 9 years older. He wore frumpy clothes. He was not a smooth talker. He didn't go to college, and I have multiple degrees. So, we were very different in that respect. He was incredibly honest about being nervous around me. He obviously didn't care about being suave. He told me I was beautiful in this very sincere, almost shaky, nervous way. And immediately after he did it, he looked away like he couldn't believe he said it. He drove a jacked up truck when I was more of a BMW type girl. He wore cowboy boots and listened to country music while I had always been drawn to the more polished, put together guy who maybe listened to Top 40. He was just all male, completely unapologetic, no airs, no performance. And I think that contrast confused me. My attraction had been trained to respond to a certain aesthetic, a certain kind of confidence. And what he offered didn't fit that mold, even though my body felt strangely at ease around him. So I canceled date 3 and told him I just wanted to be friends. It might sound contrite in hindsight, but I genuinely meant it. I wanted him in my life. He had the same temperament as some of my closest male and female friends, actually. Steady, thoughtful, emotionally safe. I was very drawn to him, even if I didn't yet understand what kind of draw it was. What really mattered, and what I'm deeply grateful for in hindsight, is that I didn't navigate that moment alone. I did have friends, family, and a therapist who gently encouraged me to give him a chance. They were telling me I was breaking my pattern and just trying to encourage me to don't dismiss him so quickly this time. And Rob, that's my husband's name, to his credit, he was still very much interested in being in my life. When I told him I just wanted to be friends, he didn't disappear. He actually agreed to it wholeheartedly. He would plan things for us to do, check in, show up. He was so genuinely kind and steady about it. No pressure, no games. Over time, he's told me that for him, he was immediately drawn to me. And he'll laugh now and say he can't believe he put up with my hot and cold behavior, because under normal circumstances, if a woman acted like that, he would have just walked away. But with me, he didn't. He stayed. He gave me space. And that space turned out to be everything, because at that time, remember, my nervous system wasn't used to calm being the foundation of a connection. Safety didn't register as exciting at first for me. And steadiness didn't create the same chemical spike I had learned to associate with desire. What felt familiar to me was intensity, the chase, the uncertainty, the emotional highs and lows. What I didn't understand yet was that attraction can evolve. Sometimes what we label as no spark is really just unfamiliar regulation. Having Rob in my life without pressure, without performance, gave me the space to experience something different. It allowed my body to recalibrate, and slowly I began to recognize that what I'd been trying to force in other relationships was actually already there, just in a form I didn't yet know how to receive. This is where dating frustration starts to make more sense. A lot of people aren't failing at dating. They're caught between who they've become and what they're still wired to want. Okay? Their values have matured faster than their attraction patterns. And that gap between what they now want and what they value and what they're attracted to, that gap creates confusion. People start thinking something is wrong with them, that they're too picky, too damaged, and that there are no good partners left. But what's often happening instead is a deeper recalibration. So with all this being said, from my perspective, dating right now is a system in conflict. And the way I see it, dating is just changing as we change, right? That uncomfortable feeling people have right now, the exhaustion, the frustration, the urge to just opt out altogether, It's information. It's pointing to what isn't working anymore and then asking for a different approach. Some people are going to just choose to opt out and not date for a while until they get recalibrated. For me, that meant getting honest about what actually supported me, not just what excited me. It was very uncomfortable, guys. I had to stop asking, why can't I find my person or what's wrong with me, and start asking a different question, which was, what kind of energy actually makes me feel good and safe over time? There's no formula here, no right or wrong way to approach this. It's really just an invitation to pay attention to where things feel hard or confusing, because that friction is usually pointing you towards something more aligned. If you're willing to listen, the payoff is going to be great. Once you stop treating dating like a problem you need to solve and start treating it like information about yourself, things will begin to shift. So when it comes to dating apps, I don't think the answer is to swear them off completely or to keep forcing yourself to use them in a way that makes you feel worse. I think the shift is more about how you use them and what you expect them to give you. Apps are good at one thing. They're introducing you to people you wouldn't otherwise meet. That's it. They're not great at creating connection, clarity, or emotional safety. And expecting them to do that is part of what leaves people feeling so disillusioned. If you're going to use them, it helps to see them as a doorway, not a destination, a way to get in the room, but you don't have to linger there indefinitely. That means noticing when swiping starts to feel numb and endless, conversations replace real world interactions. You might have to put up some boundaries around that. It means paying attention to how your body actually feels while you're using them. Do you feel curious and open, or depleted and anxious? And when you approach apps from that place, they tend to have a lot less power over how you feel and a lot more clarity about whether they belong in your life at all. And one last thing I want to say, because I think this gets lost in dating conversations right now. I'm a big believer that when it's the right connection, there's a willingness on both sides to stay present while things get sorted out, as long as there's honesty. I was very hot and cold with my husband in the beginning by telling him I just wanted to be friends, but then also wanted to hang out with him all the time. And that's just the truth. For the first 6 to 8 weeks, I was figuring myself out in real time. I wasn't playing games, but I was confused, and I was honest about that. And he was willing to stick around while I worked through it, not indefinitely, not without boundaries, but long enough for clarity to emerge. And when I say boundaries, it just means I wasn't being disrespectful or dismissive towards him. I think that's the key, because I think if I was, he would have been like, F her, I'm done. But on the flip side, if someone is the one who's hot and cold with you, it matters whether they're actually communicating what's going on or whether they're disappearing and reappearing without explanation. And those are very different things. Also, letting them drag it out indefinitely is very disrespectful to you in your time. In my case, I did not drag it out. Once I understood what was happening to me, I showed up fully. We got engaged within 6 months of knowing each other, and then we were married 3 months later. I worked through my stuff, and when I saw clearly, I fully committed. For me, the takeaway is that real connection allows some room for honesty, growth, and adjustment, especially when you're unlearning old patterns and then learning how to receive something healthier. So dating doesn't have to be this perfect timeline to be real, but it does have to be sincere when both people are willing to stay grounded, communicate, and then just let things unfold. They're going to find their rhythm, whether that means moving forward together or knowing when it's time to let go. Okay? By the way, before I wrap up, I do want to clarify that with my husband, our values are totally aligned. We have never had to face disagreements about things that really matter. I know that I went through all the differences and the reasons why I wasn't initially attracted to him. They're all surface level things. We always were on the same page as far as the things that really matter. Yes, we have very different personalities, and that can cause conflict in our relationship, but we've never argued over money, parenting, spirituality, religion, politics, all the major things we are totally aligned with. Anyways, he did end up updating his wardrobe with my help, and I started to enjoy country music. So anyway, I just wanted to clear that up. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Dating brings up so much confusion and vulnerability and conflict, and I know I'm only touching one piece of it here. So feel free to reach out, send a message, or share what this might have stirred up for you. And if you have dating questions, situations you're navigating, patterns you keep running into, or conflicts that keep showing up, I'd love to hear those too. I'm likely going to do a follow-up episode dedicated entirely to dating questions and the kinds of conflicts that come up in dating and relationships, because there's so much here that deserves that discussion. Until next time, don't react, but respond with intention.